I never wanted to take the job. Not this one. But when the bills pile up and your savings start running dry, you do what you have to, even if it means going back to the place you swore you'd never see again. Dead Man's Pass. It was Eddie's death that did it. 15 years ago, I lost my brother on that road. His rig skidded off a curve and plunged into the canyon. I was driving a mile behind him when it happened. Saw the whole thing through my windshield like a damn nightmare unfolding in slow motion. I've never been the same since. I never could forgive myself for not doing more, not being there to help. That's how it goes in this life. You haul, you drive, you move forward, keep the past in the rear view. But it's never that simple, is it? I'm Hank Collins, but most people on the road know me as Rusty. Maybe it's the hair going grey, or maybe it's just the wear and tear of 30 years behind the wheel. I've spent most of my life running rigs, hauling everything from livestock to construction equipment. This time I was hauling heavy machinery for a mining outfit in Utah. Easy enough, or so I thought. The cargo didn't bother me. What bothered me was the route, Route 163, through the heart of Monument Valley, and then up through Dead Man's Pass, the very stretch of road where Eddie lost his life. I've avoided it for years, but I couldn't avoid it this time. The money was too good, and the job came at a time when I needed it most. The first sign that something wasn't right came when I crossed into the desert. The vast expanse of red rocks stretched out for miles, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the road. It should have been peaceful, almost beautiful, but there was something off. The radio cut out first, static, then silence. Not unusual out here, but it didn't sit right. The stillness felt heavy, oppressive, like the desert itself was holding its breath. As the sun slipped away completely, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. Probably another trucker making the same route. But as the miles passed, those headlights didn't get closer. They stayed there, far back but steady, like whoever it was didn't intend to pass or fall behind, just keeping pace. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the road ahead. The canyon walls began to rise on either side of me, the road narrowing as I approached Dead Man's Pass. My hands tightened on the wheel, the familiar knot of tension growing in my chest. The road was winding, dangerous, with steep cliffs on one side and jagged rock on the other. I'd driven it 100 times before, but not since the night Eddie died. As I climbed higher, the truck started to act up. First, it was the brakes. They began to make a grinding noise that sent vibrations up through the cab. They were new, serviced just a week ago. No reason they should be failing. Then the engine sputtered just once, but enough to make my heart jump. "Come on, Rusty," I muttered to myself. "Just keep moving, 1 mile at a time." But the truck didn't listen. The headlights behind me were still there, never getting any closer, never fading away. Something about it gnawed at me, a slow realization creeping in. I knew that truck. It was Eddie's. It couldn't be. Of course, Eddie's truck was a wreck at the bottom of the canyon, rusted and forgotten. But the make, the model, even the busted left headlight, it was all the same, and it was following me. I turned up the CB, hoping for some noise to drown out my thoughts, but all I got was static. My hands were sweating now, the wheels slick beneath my fingers. The canyon walls seemed to press in tighter as I reached the most dangerous curve, the very spot where Eddie went over the edge. My foot eased off the gas, but then the CB crackled to life and a voice broke through the static. "Rusty, Hank, you got to stop." I nearly jerked the wheel in shock. I knew that voice. It was impossible, but I knew it. It was Eddie. "Eddie," I whispered, even though I knew there was no way it could be real. I fumbled with the radio, trying to clear the signal, but the voice only grew louder, swallowed by the hiss of static. "Rusty, you got to stop. You can't make the same mistake." I was losing my mind. That's what this was. Too many years on the road, too many ghosts haunting me. That's all it was. But then the truck sputtered again. The grinding in the brakes got worse. I could feel the whole rig shudder as I tried to slow down, but the brakes weren't responding. I pumped them hard, but nothing. The curve was coming up fast, and I knew I wouldn't make it if the brakes didn't hold. "Damn it!" I shouted, yanking the wheel hard to the right, pulling off onto the narrow shoulder. The truck screeched to a stop, just inches from the cliff's edge. For a long time, I sat there, heart pounding, staring at the drop below. The canyon stretched out beneath me, a black abyss swallowing the last traces of daylight. My breathing was ragged, my hands shaking, and then I saw it. Eddie's truck was still there, sitting on the road behind me, headlights glowing dimly through the dust. But now I could see it wasn't just a truck. The rig was mangled, twisted, just like it had been after the accident. The front end was smashed in, the cab crumpled, the windshield shattered, and standing next to it was Eddie. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but he didn't disappear. He was there as clear as day. His face was pale, gaunt, eyes hollow, but it was him. He was looking right at me. I stumbled out of the cab, my legs shaking beneath me. I didn't know what I was doing, didn't know what I expected to happen, but I had to get closer. I had to see Eddie. My voice cracked as I took a step toward him. How are you?" He didn't speak, just stared at me with those hollow eyes. Then slowly he raised a hand, pointing down the canyon. I followed his gaze, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I saw it. The wreckage of his truck lying at the bottom of the canyon, just as it had been all those years ago. "No," I whispered, this can't be real." Eddie's voice echoed in my mind, though his lips didn't move. "You got to stop, Rusty. You got to stop running." I fell to my knees, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I had run from this for so long, buried it deep, but now there was no escaping it. Eddie wasn't here for revenge. He wasn't here to haunt me. He was here because I'd never let him go. "I'm sorry," I choked out, tears burning my eyes. "I'm sorry, Eddie. It was my fault. I should have listened. I should have stopped." The wind howled through the canyon, and for a moment it sounded like Eddie was speaking again. But this time it wasn't a warning. It was forgiveness. "I never blamed you, Rusty." His voice whispered, softer now, like it was being carried away by the wind. "But you got to forgive yourself." The headlights of Eddie's truck flickered once, then went out. The figure standing beside it began to fade, dissolving into the dust and shadows of the canyon. And then he was gone. I sat there on the edge of the road, staring down into the canyon where my brother's truck had fallen. The air was still, the only sound the soft hum of the desert wind. I didn't know how long I sat there, but when I finally got to my feet, something had shifted inside me. The guilt was still there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. It wasn't tearing me apart from the inside. I could breathe again. I climbed back into the cab and started the engine. The truck roared to life, and the brakes responded this time, smooth and steady, as I pulled back onto the road. I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. There was nothing there. No truck, no headlights, just empty miles of desert behind me. I smiled a sad, tired smile. It was time to stop running, time to go home. As I drove through Dead Man's Pass, the echoes of the past faded into the night, leaving only the road ahead. I came to Allegan National Forest to clear my head, to shut out the noise and rebuild myself. I'd had it all planned. A long weekend of solitude in the Pennsylvania wilderness, alone with my thoughts, and maybe enough bourbon to forget the mistakes I'd made back home. The kind of reset a guy sometimes needs after losing everything. Setting up camp went smoothly enough. My RV was nestled in a secluded pocket deep within the trees, and by sunset I was settling in, trying to forget that it had only been a week since my divorce was finalized. If anyone had asked, I would have said I was here to embrace the solitude, to challenge myself. But if I'm honest, I came to avoid feeling like I'd been left behind. The forest around me was quiet. almost too quiet. No hum of civilization, no faint rumbles of cars, just an unsettling silence broken only by the occasional bird call or the rustling of branches. But I told myself that's what I wanted, peace. On the first day, I'd spent hours hiking through the old-growth trails, letting the stillness absorb my thoughts. I met only one person, a guy named Randy, who I ran into as I turned a corner on a narrow trail. He looked about my age, tall with a scruffy beard and a wide grin that said he was more than happy to have company. "Not many folks come out this far," he said, giving me a nod. "A guy like you coming out here solo? Just getting away from things?" I shrugged, not interested in diving into my personal life, but Randy's gaze stayed fixed on me, curious. "Well," he continued, "just be careful around these parts. Ever heard of the Hollow Men?" "The what?" I asked, laughing. This guy was clearly setting me up for some campfire story. "Spirits of miners," Randy explained, looking serious. "Died in a cave-in here back in the 1800s. They say they linger in these woods, hollow shells trying to lure folks to their doom. Even some of the locals won't come out here alone." He must have seen my skeptical look, because he chuckled, adding, "Laugh all you want, man. Just don't go answering voices out there, all right?" I waved him off with a smirk, but his words stuck with me as I continued down the trail. The silence of the forest, once comforting, now felt watchful, like something was waiting just beyond the trees. That night, I sat by my RV staring up at the stars that looked almost unnatural in their brightness against the dark, empty sky. I poured myself a drink, willing myself to shake off Randy's ghost stories and just focus on the calm, on the stillness of the place. But the peace didn't come. Instead, there was a strange rhythmic sound echoing through the woods, like the distant tapping of metal against rock. It was faint, almost like an echo. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of old machinery, an oddity, but not impossible in a place like this. Still, it sent a chill through me, prickling the hairs on my arms. By the time I made it inside the RV, I was brushing off the noise as my imagination. But that's when I noticed something even stranger. My pocket knife was gone. It had been right there on the countertop where I'd left it after dinner, but now it was nowhere to be found. I checked my pockets, the table, even the floor, but it had vanished. I tried to shake off a growing sense of unease, telling myself I'd just misplaced it. But the feeling stayed with me, settling into my bones as I lay in bed that night, listening to the stillness around me. Just when I was on the verge of sleep, a quiet, subtle scratching sound echoed through the RV. My heart stopped as I lay frozen, straining to listen. Nothing. It was only the wind, I told myself. But that night, my dreams were filled with shadows shifting in the trees, voices whispering my name. The next day was more of the same. I explored deeper into the forest, and the unsettling feeling only grew stronger. I started hearing faint whispers just outside my line of sight, always when I was least expecting it. They were soft and quick, like a conversation I wasn't meant to hear, or someone calling out, trying to get my attention. When I stopped to listen, though, they were gone. The worst was the fog. Sometime after midday, a strange, heavy fog rolled in, blanketing the forest in a dense grey haze. It felt like something out of a horror movie, obscuring the trails, making even familiar paths seem foreign and confusing. I tried to find my way back to camp, but every trail looked the same, winding in endless loops. By the time I finally stumbled into my campsite, I felt more disoriented than ever, as if I'd somehow crossed a boundary into a different world. That night I heard it again, the rhythmic banging, louder this time, like the echoes of old mining tools. I sat in the RV clutching a flashlight, the noise reverberating through my mind until I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to know what was making that sound. The forest was alive in a way I'd never experienced before, each shadow, each twist of a branch seeming to watch me, follow me. The sound led me deeper into the woods, my flashlight beam barely cutting through the thick fog that seemed to grow denser with every step. And then I saw them. Figures, barely visible through the haze. They were human shapes, no doubt about it, but hollow, like shadows cast against a wall. They moved in slow, shuffling steps. As I got closer, I realized they weren't walking. They were mining. Hands held picks that struck the ground rhythmically, echoing through the trees. "Hey," I called out before I could think twice. Every head snapped up at once, a dozen hollow eyes turning toward me, empty and lifeless. My breath caught in my throat as I realized these weren't people. They weren't anything close to people. I stumbled backward, heart racing. The figures closed in as I turned to run. I heard a voice calling my name. Logan. Logan. It was Randy's voice, coming from somewhere beyond the shadows. I felt an instinctive pull, a need to answer him, to follow the voice. But I couldn't shake the memory of his warning. Don't go answering voices out there. I kept running, the voice following me, calling, pleading, until I was back at the RV. I slammed the door behind me, locking it, my breath coming in gasps as I stared out into the darkness. The hollow men lingered at the edge of the clearing, their eyes fixed on me, watching, waiting. I sat in the RV, every nerve on edge, wondering if they'd try to get inside. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the soft scrape of fingers or claws against the outside walls. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to stop, to not resist, to not fight. I closed my eyes, hoping the hollow men would lose interest. Minutes ticked by agonizingly slow. Gradually, the sounds faded until finally there was silence. I opened my eyes. The figures were gone. I started the RV and floored it, heart pounding as I sped away. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station outside Allegan, hands still shaking. I wasn't sure what I'd seen, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going back. Before we start the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. I needed this escape after the year I'd had. Peace was the only thing I craved. My ex-wife had taken the house, my boss had taken my sanity, and I was left holding nothing but a bag of resentment and a camera. So here I was, finally alone in Black Rock Canyon, Joshua Tree's hauntingly beautiful desert. They said these nights were the darkest in the country, perfect for the long exposure shots I needed for my portfolio, but also, hopefully, for some much-needed clarity. The sky was ink black, scattered with stars, and my RV felt like a fragile shell in this immense desert stretching out infinitely on all sides. I set up my tripod, thinking how strange it was to have so much space, and yet feel the weight of something closing in, pressing down on me from every angle. I framed the shot. The jagged rock formations against the horizon looked like bones clawing up from beneath the desert. Just as I clicked the shutter, something caught my eye. Up on a nearby ridge, a pile of stones stacked into a rough tower stood silhouetted against the fading light. I squinted, unease prickling the back of my neck. It wasn't a cairn, at least not like the ones I'd seen before. These rocks were stacked too high and too precisely, almost ritualistic in their placement. Yet I hadn't seen a soul here for miles. I shook it off and went back to shooting. The night, with all its dark vastness, was settling in, and I was ready to forget everything. That's when I heard it. A low humming sound reverberating through the thin air. It was faint, just a vibration, but I felt it in my bones. I stood still, straining my ears as it grew louder, rhythmic, almost like a chant. I whipped around, expecting to find some desert animal or another hiker, but there was nothing. Just the stacked stones on the ridge, now looming in the moonlight, their shadows long and spindly, like fingers stretching down toward me. "All right," I muttered, forcing a laugh. "Maybe you're just getting a little too comfortable out here." I forced myself back into the RV, telling myself it was just the wind, a desert echo, a trick of the open space. But that hum stuck with me. burrowing into my chest like a thorn I couldn't shake. I didn't think much more of it until the middle of the night when I was jolted awake by a noise inside the RV, a clicking, snapping sound. My heart pounded as I sat up, listening. Nothing. I climbed out of bed and checked the windows. That's when I noticed my camera's light blinking. I picked it up and froze. The photos, they'd been taken while I was sleeping. Distorted, blurry images of me lying in bed, the RV's dim interior barely lit. What the? I muttered, flipping through them. There was no way I had taken these. The only other option was that someone had been in here while I was asleep. My pulse raced as I checked the door, locked. I told myself the camera must have malfunctioned. A faulty shutter, maybe. But in every photo, just beyond the frame, there was a shadow. A faint blur, like someone was standing just out of sight. I glanced out the window, half expecting to see someone staring back at me. But there was nothing. Just the empty desert. Reluctantly, I climbed back into bed, but sleep was impossible. Every creak of the RV felt amplified in the silence. I lay awake until the first light of dawn finally broke the tension. In the harsh light of morning, my nerves felt foolish. Determined to shake the feeling, I threw on my gear and hiked up to the ridge where I'd seen the stacked stones. The desert had that strange quiet hum again, as if it were alive and breathing. The closer I got, the more stones I saw, scattered across the sand, piled high, some forming a rough circle. At the center, I found something I hadn't expected, a rusted metal plaque, half buried in the dirt, worn down but still legible. I brushed off the sand and read aloud, "Do not disturb the desert's watchful ones." A chill ran through me. I'd heard enough stories to know some things were better left alone. I made my way back to the RV, but the feeling of being watched clung to me. I was only a few feet from the door when I saw it, someone standing at the edge of the rocks, staring down at me. My heart skipped. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. They just stood there, perfectly still, a tall figure with shadowed features. I blinked, and they were gone. That night, I set up my camera again, trying to capture the stars, hoping to drown out the unease. But as the hours passed, the desert seemed to close in, and the silence grew almost deafening. Around midnight, the humming started again, that same low drone like a chant. I shut my eyes, telling myself it was just the wind. But when I opened them, something shifted at the edge of my vision. There it was again, that shadowy figure, this time closer, standing just beyond the reach of my headlights. Its features were obscured, but it was unmistakably human. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its eyes, cold and unblinking. "Who are you?" I shouted. No response. It slowly lifted a hand, pointing toward the ridge and the circle of stones. My mind screamed to stay in the RV, to lock the doors, but something inside me pushed back. A bitter voice whispering that I was here to face my demons, even if they were made of nothing more than shadow and sand. I stepped out, heart pounding, and aimed my flashlight. Nothing. The figure was gone. But my camera, it kept snapping photos on its own. I checked the screen, flipping through the images. Each photo showed me standing in front of the RV, but behind me there was someone. A figure grinning, its face half-formed, almost human, but twisted, as if made from sand and shadow. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the piled stones. A cold rush brushed against my neck, a whisper, low and distorted, "Ethan." I snapped. I hurled the camera at the rocks, smashing it to pieces. I don't know why, but something told me that's what it wanted. The desert fell silent. I felt it let go. I drove all night, never looking back. Weeks later, I found a package in the mail. No return address. No note. Inside was a single photo. It was one of my last shots from Black Rock Canyon. Me, asleep in the RV. But in the corner, a shadow hovered over me, its hand reaching out. And on the back, 5 chilling words were scrawled. "You will come back someday." The road wound through the dense trees, snaking deeper into the heart of the low national forest. The thick canopy above allowed only sparse sunlight to filter through, casting shadows across the narrow dirt road. I gripped the steering wheel of my RV, trying to shake off the gnawing sense of unease creeping up my spine. It had been 3 hours since I had passed another vehicle. Solitude was the whole point, wasn't it? This trip was supposed to help me clear my head, to reconnect with myself after the divorce. I had spent the last few months in a fog, and this trip to Deadwood Creek was meant to be my escape, a test of independence. No ex-husband, no stress, just me in the wilderness. I needed this. At least that's what I had been telling myself for the past 2 weeks. Deadwood Creek Campground wasn't listed on any mainstream maps, just a blip on an obscure site for hardcore campers who sought isolation. The campground had a reputation, but that was part of the appeal. I needed remote quiet, far away from anything that reminded me of what I had left behind. But as I pulled into the clearing, past the sign half buried in moss that read Deadwood Creek, a shiver ran through me. The place was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you second-guess your decision to be alone. I parked the RV near a small trickling creek. The only other vehicle was an old beat-up camper a short distance away, nestled under the towering pines. It was empty. No sign of movement, no campfire. Good. I wasn't in the mood for socializing. I stepped out into the cool afternoon air and surveyed the site. The woods were thick, ancient. The ground was littered with pine needles, muffling the sound of my footsteps. A perfect retreat. I set up camp, unfolding my chair and setting my mug of tea beside me as I sat by the creek, listening to the soft gurgle of the water. It was peaceful, just as I had hoped. But after a while, the peace felt off. Too still. The air grew heavy, pressing down on me, and the silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was oppressive. My mind wandered back to the stories I had read online, the rumors about Deadwood Creek's dark history. This used to be a mining settlement during the gold rush, or so the tale went. Dozens of men had come to find their fortunes, but most found only death. Mysterious disappearances, bodies never recovered. Some say the men still haunt the place, bound to the land, working their endless shifts beneath the earth. I dismissed it at first, chalking it up to local folklore meant to spook tourists. But now, sitting alone in the fading light, the stories didn't seem so far-fetched. The wind rustled the trees, and I jumped at the sound. Get it together, Hannah, I thought, rolling my eyes at my own nerves. I hadn't come all this way just to scare myself into leaving. That's when I saw him. A man standing near the edge of the campground, just at the tree line, leaning against a tree. He was tall with broad shoulders and a scruffy beard, his clothes worn and dirty as if he'd been out here for weeks. His gaze was fixed on me. I waved awkwardly, and he lifted a hand in response before slowly walking over. "Didn't mean to spook you," he said, his voice easy, almost too casual. "Didn't expect anyone else out here this late in the season." "I wasn't expecting anyone either," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just needed some time alone, you know." "Yeah, I get that," he chuckled, though the sound didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm Rick, by the way. Been coming here for years." I nodded, unsure what to say. Rick had the look of someone who belonged out here, who knew the woods like the back of his hand. I didn't. "Be careful out here," Rick said after a pause, his gaze drifting toward the woods. Deadwood Creek's got a history. Strange things happen when the sun goes down. My skin prickled at his words, but I forced myself to laugh. "Let me guess, ghost stories? Miners and all that?" Rick's expression didn't change. "Something like that. Just don't stray too far from your camp." He turned and walked back to his camper without another word, leaving me with a knot of unease in my stomach. That night, I couldn't sleep. The RV was quiet, the temperature inside dropping faster than I expected. I wrapped myself in blankets and tried to ignore the feeling that something was wrong. Then the sound started. At first, I thought it was the wind, but soon I realized it was more than that. Faint at first, barely perceptible. A rhythmic clinking echoed from the direction of the creek. It sounded like tools, mining tools, pickaxes striking rock. I bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding. No, I was just imagining it. This was what I came here for, solitude. But I couldn't shake the sound. It was getting louder, the metallic rhythm persistent, almost like a heartbeat. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed out of the RV, my breath visible in the cold night air. The forest was a wall of darkness, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. The sound of the creek was louder now, rushing over rocks, and I could swear I heard voices, whispers carried on the wind. My flashlight beam swept across the campsite, catching nothing but trees and the faint shimmer of water. But then I saw them. Figures, shadowy, half-formed shapes moving by the creek. Their outlines faint but unmistakably human. They moved like they were working, digging, swinging pickaxes in time with the clinking sound. My throat tightened as I realized they weren't there in the normal sense. They were translucent, faded. I stumbled back, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. Ghosts? No, that was impossible. I backed toward the RV, my pulse racing, but as I turned, I nearly collided with Rick. "Easy," he said, raising his hands. "I saw your light. Thought I'd come check on you." I couldn't find the words to explain what I'd just seen. But Rick didn't need me to. He just looked over at the creek and nodded, his face unreadable. "They come out at night. The miners, been here for over a century, trapped in their own hell." I swallowed hard, trying to suppress the rising panic. "You mean you know about this? What is this place?" Rick gave a half smile, though it was more sad than comforting. "Deadwood Creek. These men came here to find gold, but all they found was death. Now they're stuck here, working the land forever. Some nights they're just echoes. Other nights..." He trailed off, but the implication was clear. On other nights, they weren't just echoes. If you'd told me a week ago that I'd be clutching my best friend's arm, hiding from a shadow creature in the Utah desert, I'd have laughed. That's the sort of stuff reserved for ghost stories told around the campfire, right? But now, as I crouch low in the sand, staring at the shadow shifting through the rocks like smoke, the chill in my spine tells me I was wrong. Tyler and I had been planning this trip for ages. It was supposed to be a break from our relentless lives back in San Francisco. When my promotion came through, I convinced him we had to celebrate by camping across the Southwest, ticking off bucket list spots along the way. Dead Horse Point was the prize, the place I'd looked forward to the most. Its isolation, haunting beauty, and honestly, its reputation for eerie legends that I couldn't resist. We pulled in late, just as the sun was setting over the canyon, casting a blood-red glow across the twisted rock formations. I remember that unease settled over me then, the kind that sends a tiny shiver from the back of your neck all the way down. Tyler, ever the skeptic, brushed it off as I pointed out that we were alone in this remote part of the park. "Great, more room for us," he joked, snapping photos of the stunning desert horizon. It took us a bit longer to find a spot than we'd planned. Our GPS was acting weird, leading us down dirt trails that seemed to spiral into nowhere. Eventually, Tyler managed to maneuver our RV into a flat area. Not ideal, but secluded and scenic. "Perfect," he said. I wasn't so sure. When we finally set up camp, the daylight had faded, leaving us bathed in the cold blue of twilight. I fiddled with our old portable radio, hoping to get some music to fill the silence, but the thing just crackled with static before sputtering and dying altogether. Tyler laughed, but I caught the way his eyes darted around the empty landscape. It felt almost oppressive, the way the land seemed to watch us. "You and that ghost-loving imagination," Tyler teased, rummaging through his bag. "Maybe it's a sign, or just Utah's finest weather." "Ha, very funny," I replied, forcing a laugh. "But this place has stories, Ty. Have you heard of the Skinwalker?" "The what?" he chuckled, turning to face me. Mia, are you seriously bringing up ghost stories? Not ghosts, exactly, I said, trying to hide how uneasy I felt. Skinwalkers are shapeshifters in Navajo legends. They can mimic people, even voices, to lure you away. People say they're evil spirits in human or animal form. Tyler looked at me with that familiar, infuriating smirk. Oh yeah? Then let's summon one here. Skinwalker, Skinwalker, show yourself! I hissed for him to stop, but he just laughed and returned to the viewfinder on his camera, snapping photos of the canyon now fully cloaked in darkness. I closed the RV door, hoping to shut out the chill that had suddenly settled into my bones. But that shiver, that sense of being watched, it lingered. It was maybe an hour later when the first sound came, a light shuffling sound outside, like footsteps in the gravel. My heart skipped, and I shot Tyler a look, but he was already putting on a brave face, pulling his boots on to investigate. It's probably an animal, he whispered, winking. Mountain lions, right? Yeah, because mountain lions sound like people, I said, my voice barely a breath. He ignored me, clicking on his flashlight and stepping out. It was quiet, eerily so. Tyler scanned the flashlight across the rocks. The beam cast long shadows. For a moment, I was almost convinced he was right, that we were just being paranoid in the strange silence of the desert. But then we heard it, a whisper. It was faint, but unmistakable. Mia! Mia! My breath caught in my throat. The voice was scratchy and low, calling my name. I whipped around to face Tyler, but he was frozen, his face drained of color as the voice echoed again. Did you? I stammered, trying to find the words. Tyler didn't answer. He just stared, flashlight clutched so tightly his knuckles were white. Mia! Mia! This time the voice seemed closer, as if it was slipping between the rocks, winding its way through the desert toward us. It sounded familiar too. Too familiar, but wrong. Let's go inside, I whispered. Tyler nodded, and we backed up slowly, not turning our backs on the emptiness around us. Once inside, I locked the door. Our breaths were rapid in the tight space. Tyler finally spoke, his voice shaking. Tell me that was just the wind. I don't think so, I replied, glancing out the window. The night was still, an unnatural stillness that seemed to hold its breath. Just as was starting to feel a little less tense, there was a sharp knock on the side of the RV. We both froze. Another knock, then another, rhythmic, echoing through the metal walls. Tyler's face paled, and I could feel my heartbeat hammering in my throat. Who's there? He called, his voice wavering. The only answer was a slow scrape against the door, a sound that made my skin crawl. I squeezed Tyler's arm. Don't open it. What if someone's hurt? He whispered back, already inching toward the door. But I couldn't shake the feeling that opening that door would be the worst thing we could do. Just wait. Then, to our horror, we heard it, Tyler's voice calling from outside. Tyler, help! Come out here. Tyler looked at me, eyes wide with terror. What? How? He stammered. The voice repeated, distorted, stretching his name into a twisted mockery. Tyler! Tyler! I grabbed his hand, squeezing hard. Don't answer. Whatever you do, don't answer it. The minutes dragged by, each second stretching into eternity as the voice continued calling, beckoning us. Tyler and I stayed as still as statues, clutching each other. The silence in the RV was thick and heavy. Finally, the knocking stopped, and for a moment, all was quiet. But just when I started to breathe again, the RV rocked violently, as though something massive had slammed into it. Tyler scrambled to the driver's seat, twisting the keys to start the engine, but it sputtered and died. He tried again and again, but nothing. The shape outside pressed itself against the window, casting an elongated, inhuman shadow. It had limbs too long, eyes that glowed with a sickly yellow light. Its mouth was twisted into an eerie mimicry of a smile that seemed to stretch too far. Oh my God, Tyler gasped, clutching the steering wheel, white-knuckled. My legs were sore, and I could feel the sweat drying on my skin. chilling me in the early evening air as I fell down beside the fire we had just managed to coax to life. We were miles away from the main campgrounds, deep in Joshua Tree's endless desert. A decision that had seemed thrilling earlier in the day. But now that the sun was dipping below the horizon, washing the landscape in shades of deep red and purple, I felt a twinge of uncertainty prickling at the back of my neck. It was my idea, of course. I wanted the adventure, the isolation, the strange beauty of the desert at night. The three of us, my boyfriend Alex, my best friend Brianna, and her boyfriend Jared, had all agreed to come out to this spot after some careful convincing on my part. We'd spent the day exploring hidden trails, taking pictures, and climbing the rocky outcroppings that dotted the vast desert. But now, as darkness settled in, I found myself regretting the distance we'd put between ourselves and any other campers. I shifted closer to Alex, trying to ignore my nerves. Brianna sat across from me, her eyes darting nervously at the shadows pooling between the rocks around us. She had never been thrilled about camping so far from civilization, but she'd gone along with it for my sake. Jared, on the other hand, was his usual laid-back self, poking at the fire with a stick. He kept glancing at Brianna and then back at me, his playful grin not quite masking his own unease. "Is this a bad time to mention my tent's busted?" Alex muttered, inspecting a rip along the seam. I groaned. "Seriously? You didn't check before we left?" He shrugged, throwing a lopsided smile my way. "I'm a live-in-the-moment kind of guy. We'll all fit in one tent, right?" "I guess we don't have much choice," Brianna said, shooting me a worried glance. "Let's just hope we all survive the night." Jared laughed a little too loudly. "Come on, Bri. It's not like anything's going to happen out here. It's just us and the desert." But Brianna's eyes hadn't left the encroaching shadows, and I could feel the tightness in her voice. "Yeah, well, that's what they say in every horror movie right before things get bad." The fire crackled as we fell silent, each of us staring into the flames. The familiar rhythm of camping jokes, stories, and laughter was somehow absent tonight. Instead, an uneasy quiet filled the space between us like a cold mist. Even Jared had stopped laughing. He looked up at the darkening sky, his face shadowed in the firelight, and for a moment I thought he looked genuinely spooky. Just then I heard it, a faint rhythmic tapping like something knocking against rock far out in the desert. I glanced at Alex, who was listening too, his brow furrowed. "Probably just the wind," he said, though his voice held a note of doubt. Brianna's eyes darted to mine. Jared scoffed, but he didn't sound as confident as usual. "It's just the rocks shifting, or animals or something." "Animals that tap?" Brianna asked, her tone sarcastic but edged with genuine fear. Alex put a reassuring arm around me, but I could feel the tension in his grip. "Let's just settle in, okay? It's nothing." I nodded, forcing myself to believe him, even though the tapping hadn't stopped. It was steady, too steady, like the beat of a slow drum. Each time it faded into the silence, I could feel a tightness in my chest, an instinctual alarm I couldn't shake. I glanced up at the jagged rocks surrounding our campsite, half expecting to see a figure standing there. But there was nothing, just shadows, deeper and darker than the night itself. Brianna whispered, "I heard this story once about this thing that lives out here. They call it the Yucca Man." I forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow. "Oh, great, Brianna. Perfect story for a night like this." She looked at me seriously. "They say he's like a guardian spirit of the desert, tall with eyes that glow in the dark. Supposedly he watches over Joshua Tree and doesn't like it when people get too close, especially if they wander off the main trails." Alex rolled his eyes. "And he just taps rocks to scare us off?" Brianna shrugged, but her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know. Maybe he's just waiting." "Waiting for what?" Jared scoffed, though his bravado was wearing thin. Before she could answer, Alex stood up and grabbed his flashlight, shining it across the rocks. I watched as the beam illuminated the stark, twisted shapes of the Joshua trees, their shadows stretching and warping across the sand. Just as he moved the light, I saw it, a tall, dark shape standing motionless against the rocks. My heart stopped, and I felt Alex's grip on my hand tighten. "Did you see that?" he whispered. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. The figure was gone as quickly as it had appeared, blending back into the darkness. Jared laughed nervously, breaking the tension. "It's probably just a shadow, guys. You're all wound up for nothing." But even Jared didn't sound convinced. He picked up his flashlight, swinging it around as if he could somehow erase the eerie image from our minds. The tapping had stopped, leaving a thick, oppressive silence in its place. Brianna's voice was small. "Can we just go back?" Alex shook his head, even though his face was pale. "No way. We came all this way. We're just letting our imaginations get the best of us." But I wasn't so sure. The feeling in the air was different now, like we weren't alone, like there was something ancient and unseen watching us. I looked out into the darkness, straining my eyes for any sign of movement. My gaze landed on a rock nearby, where strange symbols were scratched into the surface, intricate spirals and jagged lines. I hadn't noticed them before. "Guys, come look at this," I whispered, beckoning them over. They all gathered around, staring at the markings. Brianna looked unnerved, and even Jared's face was grim. "Looks like old petroglyphs," Alex muttered, though his voice lacked confidence. "Probably left by Native Americans or something." Brianna shook her head. "These aren't like any petroglyphs I've seen." We stared in silence, the weight of the discovery pressing down on us. I could feel something shift in the air, a dark, lurking presence just beyond our understanding. It was like the symbols were meant as a warning, and we were trespassing on something sacred. Then the tapping began again. This time, it was louder, closer. My heart raced as I looked around, the shadows seeming to close in on us. Suddenly, Brianna screamed, pointing to the rocks. The figure was back, closer this time, a tall, thin shadow with eyes that gleamed faintly in the firelight. It watched us, unblinking, its gaze cold and penetrating. Jared stumbled back, his bravado gone. "What the hell is that?" Alex grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the tent. "Get inside now." We all scrambled into the tent, zipping it up in a frenzy. The fire outside flickered, casting an eerie glow on the tent walls, making our shadows dance. I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow, and tried to quiet it, listening for any sound outside. We sat in silence, huddled together, straining our ears for any sign of movement. For a few moments, there was nothing. Then I heard it, a low whispering voice calling my name. My blood ran cold, and I felt Alex stiffen beside me. "Mia!" It was my own voice coming from outside the tent. I clutched Alex's arm, trying to keep myself calm, but inside I was shaking. The voice grew louder. Then I heard Alex's name, then Brianna's, then Jared's. It was like it knew us, like it was calling us out one by one. "Don't listen to it," Alex whispered, his voice shaking. "It's just trying to scare us." But the voice persisted, repeating our names over and over, a haunting chant that made my skin crawl. I could feel the fear thick in the air, an almost tangible weight pressing down on us. Suddenly, the voice stopped, replaced by a scratching sound, like nails dragging against the fabric of the tent. I held my breath, frozen in place, as the scratching moved along the walls, circling slowly. My mind raced, searching for any way out, any escape. Brianna was crying quietly, her head buried in Jared's shoulder, and Jared held her tight, his face pale and drawn. I could feel Alex trembling beside me, his usual confidence replaced by raw fear. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the scratching stopped. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, my body tense and ready to bolt. "We need to leave," I whispered. Alex nodded, his face set with determination. "We're going now." We gathered our things as quickly as we could, stumbling out of the tent and into the cold desert night. The fire had died down, leaving only a faint glow to guide us. I looked around, half expecting to see the figure waiting for us, but the desert was empty. We started moving, our steps fast and panicked, our flashlights sweeping over the rocks as we tried to find the trail. Every few steps I glanced over my shoulder, certain I would see it following us. But there was nothing, only the still, oppressive silence of the desert. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached the trailhead, our car waiting just where we'd left it. We piled in, slamming the doors, and Alex started the engine, speeding down the dirt road without looking back. As we drove away, I glanced out the window and for a brief moment I saw it. The tall, dark figure standing on the edge of the rocks, watching us as we left its territory. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, a silent warning, a promise that we would not be welcome if we ever dared to return. I didn't look back again. None of us spoke the entire way home, but that night, when I closed my eyes, I could still hear it. The rhythmic tapping, the whisper of my name, the feeling of something watching, waiting, lurking just beyond the edge of the light. And I knew that a part of the desert had come back with me, a silent shadow that would haunt me, watching forever. I thought the desert would heal me. Red Rock Canyon was supposed to be a place to clear my head, to sit in silence and let the vast empty land take away the chaos of the last few months. I'd lost everything. My wife, my job, and I needed something, anything to remind me there was still some peace left in the world. Instead, it felt like I'd driven into a nightmare. I parked the RV at the far end of the campground, as far away from the few other campers as I could get. I wanted solitude to think, or maybe to stop thinking. I wasn't sure. The sun was setting as I stepped out, casting a deep, orange glow across the red sandstone cliffs. It was beautiful, the kind of beauty that made you feel small, like the world was too big for you to matter. Maybe that's what I needed. I'd been driving for hours, with only the occasional crackle of the radio for company. The RV was old, creaking and groaning as I navigated the winding roads into the canyon. It had seen better days, much like me. As I stretched, a low rumble came from under the hood. "Great," I muttered, giving the RV a half-hearted kick. The engine had been acting up for days, but I figured I could deal with it later. I wasn't here for that. I was here to get away, to let the emptiness of the desert swallow me whole. That night after I'd settled in, I sat outside the RV, staring up at the stars. Out here, away from the city, the sky was incredible, clear, endless. But as the stars twinkled overhead, I noticed something strange. At first, I thought they were planes, blinking in and out far above the canyon. But then they moved too fast, too erratically. I leaned forward, squinting. There were 3 of them, glowing faintly blue, darting through the sky in impossible patterns. They weren't planes. I wasn't sure what they were. I stood up, straining my neck to follow their path as they circled overhead. They blinked off one by one, and the desert was silent again. Just stars, I told myself, even though I knew it wasn't true. The next morning, I woke up to find the RV's battery almost dead. My phone, which I'd left charging overnight, hadn't gained a single bar. I tried turning the engine over, but all I got was a dull click. My chest tightened. Being stranded in the middle of the desert wasn't part of the plan. I had enough food and water for a few days, sure, but the isolation was starting to feel less like a retreat and more like a trap. Milo's RV was parked a few spots down, his beat-up RV sitting in the shade of a large rock formation. He waved me over as I stepped out of mine, a wide grin on his sunburnt face. "Morning," he called. "Beautiful day, huh?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, sure. Hey, you wouldn't happen to have jumper cables, would you?" Milo scratched his scruffy chin, then shook his head. "Sorry, friend, but I can give you a ride into town later if you need help. It's not too far." I thanked him, but something about Milo unsettled me. Maybe it was how relaxed he seemed, like this place wasn't bothering him at all. As I stood there, he tilted his head toward the canyon walls. "You see the lights last night?" he asked. I froze. "Yeah, what were they?" He shrugged, like it was nothing. "Oh, those things. People talk about them all the time. Could be military, could be something else. No one really knows, but they've been around as long as I've been camping out here." I laughed nervously. "Something else, huh?" Milo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "People say they're not from this world. I don't know about that, but sometimes they follow you. Just don't go too far out at night, and you'll be fine." I forced another laugh, but my stomach churned. Milo's tone was too casual, too accepting. I thanked him again and went back to my RV, trying to shake off the feeling that I was missing something important. The day dragged on, the heat baking the ground beneath my feet. I spent the afternoon hiking a short trail near the campground, trying to clear my head, but the vast emptiness only made me feel more alone. I kept thinking about the lights, about how they'd moved, how they seemed to watch me. That night they returned. I was sitting outside again, nursing a warm beer and staring at the sky when I saw them, 3 faint blue lights hovering over the canyon. This time they were closer, too close. They flickered almost playfully, darting back and forth like they were searching for something. I stood up, my heart pounding. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this place made sense. I backed toward the RV, never taking my eyes off the lights, but as I reached for the door, the lights blinked out, gone, just like that. A cold breeze swept through the canyon and I shivered. It was too quiet. No wind, no insects, nothing. Just the dead, suffocating silence of the desert. Then the RV lights flickered once, twice, and went dark. My chest tightened as I stumbled into the RV, fumbling for the flashlight. I clicked it on, but the beam was weak, barely cutting through the darkness. The electrical panel was dead and my phone wouldn't turn on. Every piece of technology I had was failing, and I had no idea why. A sudden knock on the door made me jump. "Chris, you okay?" It was Emily, the hiker I'd met earlier that day. She'd pitched her tent nearby, planning to stay for a few nights before heading out. I opened the door, trying to hide my panic. "Yeah, just some electrical issues," I said, forcing a smile. "Everything's dead. I'm guessing the battery's shot." Emily frowned, glancing back at her tent. "That's weird. My phone's dead too, and my flashlight keeps flickering." Her voice was calm, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She felt it too, the strangeness in the air, the weight of the silence. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you think it's the lights?" Milo told me about them earlier, said people disappear sometimes. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my breathing steady. "Disappear?" Emily nodded, her gaze drifting toward the canyon. "Yeah, it's mostly stories, but you seemed pretty convinced." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt thick, heavy, like the desert was closing in on us. I wasn't sure if I believed in Milo's campfire tales, but the lights, they were real and they weren't natural. "We should get out of here," Emily said, breaking the silence. "I don't like this." "I can't," I replied. "My RV won't start." She hesitated, then nodded. "Mine either. I tried earlier, but it's completely dead." We stood there staring at each other, the weight of the situation sinking in. Something was wrong with this place. The lights weren't just an oddity. They were doing something, affecting everything around us, and we were stuck miles from any help. "We'll wait till morning," I said, trying to sound confident. "Maybe it's just a temporary glitch. We'll figure it out." Emily didn't look convinced, but she nodded and headed back to her tent. I locked the RV door behind her, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. That night, I barely slept. The silence was oppressive, like a blanket wrapped too tight around me. Every creak of the RV, every gust of wind made my heart race. I kept waiting for the lights to come back, to hover outside my window, but they didn't. Instead, I woke up sometime in the early hours, drenched in sweat, my head pounding. I sat up, blinking in the darkness. Something was wrong. I glanced at my watch. It was 4 a.m., but that didn't make sense. I'd checked the time just moments ago, and it had been midnight. Where had the hours gone? I stumbled outside, feeling disoriented. The air was cooler now, the desert's chill settling in. The stars were out, but there was no sign of the lights. My mind was foggy, like I'd been dreaming, but the dust on my boots told me I'd been walking, but where and why? Panic surged through me. I couldn't remember. Hours were missing, and I had no idea what had happened. The lights were playing with us, toying with our sense of reality. I ran toward Emily's tent, calling her name, but when I got there, she was gone. Her tent was empty, her pack still there, but she was nowhere to be found. "Emily," I shouted, my voice echoing off the canyon walls. Nothing. The only sound was the wind. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But the lights, the missing time, it all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. We weren't alone. I sprinted back to my RV, slamming the door behind me, and tried the engine again. To my shock, it roared to life. The headlights flickered on, and I didn't hesitate. I jammed the gear shift into drive and tore out of the campsite, gravel kicking up behind me as I sped down the winding canyon road. I glanced in the rearview mirror for just a second. I saw them, the blue lights hovering in the distance, watching me leave. I didn't stop driving until I hit the outskirts of Las Vegas. The neon lights of the city felt like a lifeline. But even then, as I pulled into a gas station, my hands shaking, I couldn't shake the feeling that the lights were still out there, waiting. And I wasn't sure if I'd really escaped at all. I needed this escape after the year I'd had. Peace was the only thing I craved. My ex-wife had taken the house, my boss had taken my sanity, and I was left holding nothing but a bag of resentment and a camera. So here I was, finally alone in Black Rock Canyon, Joshua Tree's hauntingly beautiful desert. They said these nights were the darkest in the country, perfect for the long exposure shots I needed for my portfolio, but also, hopefully, for some much-needed clarity. The sky was ink black, spattered with a smattering of stars, and my RV felt like a fragile shell in this immense desert, which stretched out infinitely on all sides. I set up my tripod, thinking how strange it was to have so much space and yet feel the weight of something closing in, pressing down on me from every angle. I framed the shot, the rock formations jagged against the horizon like bones clawing up from beneath the desert. Just as I clicked the shutter, something caught my eye. Something odd up on a nearby ridge. A pile of stones stacked in a rough tower stood silhouetted against the fading light. I squinted, unease prickling the back of my neck. It wasn't a cairn, at least not like the ones I'd seen before. These rocks were stacked too high and too precisely, almost ritualistic in their placement. And yet, I'd seen no one here, not a soul for miles. I shook it off and went back to shooting. The night, with all its dark expansiveness, was settling in, and I was ready to forget everything. That's when I heard it, a low humming sound reverberating through the thin air. It was faint, just a vibration, but I felt it in my bones. I stood still, listening, straining my ears as it grew louder, rhythmic, almost like a chant. I whipped around, expecting to find some desert animal or even another hiker, but there was nothing. Just the stacked stones up on the ridge, now looming in the moonlight, their shadows long and spindly like fingers stretching down toward me. "All right," I muttered, forcing a laugh. "Maybe you're just getting a little too comfortable out here." I forced myself back into the RV, telling myself it was just the wind, a desert echo, a trick of the open space. But that hum stuck with me, burrowing into my chest like a thorn I couldn't shake. I didn't think much more of it until the middle of the night when I was jolted awake by a noise inside the RV, a clicking, snapping sound. My heart hammered as I sat up, listening. Nothing. I climbed out of bed, checking the windows, and noticed my camera's light blinking. That's when I saw them, the pictures. They'd been taken while I was sleeping. Distorted, blurry images of me lying in bed, the RV's dim interior barely illuminated. What the? I muttered, flipping through them, my mind scrambling for an explanation. There was no way I'd taken these. The only other option was that someone had been in here while I was asleep. My pulse raced, and I checked the door, feeling a wave of relief to find it locked. I told myself the camera was just malfunctioning, a faulty shutter maybe. But still, the hairs on my arms stood on end. In every photo, just beyond the frame, there was a shadow, a faint blur like someone was standing just out of sight. I glanced out the window, half expecting to see someone staring back at me, but there was nothing, just the desert, empty and still. Reluctantly, I climbed back into bed, but sleep was out of the question. Every creak of the RV felt amplified in the silence, and I lay awake until the first light of dawn finally broke the tension. In the harsh light of morning, my nerves felt foolish. Determined to shake the feeling, I threw on my gear and hiked up to the ridge where I'd seen the stacked stones. The desert had that strange, quiet hum again, as if it were alive and breathing. The closer I got, the more stones I saw. They were everywhere, scattered across the sand, piled high, some forming a rough circle. At the center, I found something I hadn't expected, a rusted metal plaque, half buried in the dirt, worn down but legible. I brushed the sand off, reading the words aloud, feeling the weight of each one. Do not disturb the desert's watchful ones. I swallowed, feeling an odd chill run through me. I'd read enough stories, heard enough lore, to know that some things were better left alone. I made my way back to the RV, but that feeling of being watched clung to me. I was only a few feet from the door when I saw it. Someone standing at the edge of the rock, staring down at me. My heart skipped. I called out, "Hello," but there was no answer. They just stood there, perfectly still, a tall figure with shadowed features. I blinked, and they were gone. That night, I set up my camera again, trying to capture the stars, hoping to drown out the unease and work. But as the hours passed, the desert seemed to close in around me, and the silence grew almost deafening. Around midnight, the humming started again, that same low drone, a chant. I shut my eyes, telling myself it was a desert sound, a trick of the wind. But when I opened my eyes, something shifted at the edge of my vision. There it was again, that shadowy figure. This time, closer, standing just beyond the reach of my headlights. Its features were obscured but unmistakably human. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its eyes on me, cold and unblinking. "Who are you?" I shouted, but it said nothing. It just stood there, silent, watching. I felt the chill seep into my bones as the figure slowly lifted a hand, pointing toward the ridge and the circle of stones. My mind screamed at me to stay in the RV, to lock the doors and wait for morning. But something inside me pushed back, a bitter voice whispering that I was here to face my demons, even if they were made of nothing more than shadow and sand. I stepped out of the RV, heart pounding, and aimed my flashlight toward the figure, but the light revealed nothing. The figure was gone. My camera, though. My camera kept snapping on its own, capturing photo after photo. I checked the screen, flipping through them with growing horror. The pictures showed me standing in front of the RV, but behind me there was someone, a figure standing in the shadows, grinning, its face half-formed, almost human but twisted, as if made from sand and shadows. I stumbled back, fighting the instinct to run, and nearly tripped over the piled stones near the ridge. My breath was ragged, and I felt something cold brush against my neck, a whisper, low and distorted, echoing in the emptiness. "Ethan," it hissed. I snapped. I hurled my camera toward the stones, smashing it on the rocks, hearing it shatter into pieces. I don't know why I did it, but something told me that's what it wanted. That whatever this thing was, it had fed off my memories, my photos, my presence. The desert was silent again. I felt it let go of me, the weight easing, and I staggered back to the RV, trembling, feeling a strange sense of loss and relief. I drove all night. the desert a blur of shadows in my rearview mirror, refusing to look back. But as dawn broke, I felt a strange calm settle over me, a peace I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know what I'd seen, but I knew it was gone, left behind with the shattered pieces of my camera and whatever had haunted me for so long. Weeks later, I found a package in the mail. No return address, no note. Just a simple envelope. Inside was a single photo. It was one of my last shots from Black Rock Canyon, a photo of me asleep in the RV, peaceful, unaware. But in the corner of the image, a shadow hovered over me, its hand reaching out as if trying to pull something out of me. And there, scrawled across the back of the photo, were 5 chilling words. "You will come back someday." "Mia," the creature hissed, its voice a blend of my own and Tyler's, distorted, mocking. "Come outside." I shook my head, my voice trembling. "Don't look at it. Don't listen to it." But it was too late. Tyler couldn't tear his gaze away from that awful face in the window. His breath hitched as the creature's mouth stretched impossibly wide. Suddenly he screamed, clutching his ears as if to block out the sound. I pulled him away, whispering words I barely remembered from some article on Navajo blessings, words I didn't even know if I was pronouncing right. But as I spoke, the creature seemed to pause, tilting its head in confusion, almost weakened. Seizing my chance, I dragged Tyler out of his stupor and together we stumbled out of the RV. The creature's eyes followed us, glowing like embers, as we bolted toward a narrow crevice in the rocks. I held Tyler tight as we crouched in the shadows, watching the thing stalk around our RV, frustrated, snarling. It hissed again, a guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Mia, you can't hide." Tyler's hand was clammy in mine, his breath shallow. "Mia, what is that thing?" "A skinwalker," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "It's feeding off our fear." Tyler squeezed my hand tighter. "What do we do?" "We stay quiet and don't look it in the eyes," I murmured, remembering the warning. "We wait." Time seemed to slow. The skinwalker circled the rocks, searching, stalking, its low growl echoing off the stone. At one point it stopped, sniffing the air, its gaze passing right over us, so close I could see the rotting skin around its eyes. We held our breaths, not daring to move. Slowly, the creature slunk away, disappearing into the shadows. The silence stretched on, each second a lifetime. Eventually we crept back to the RV, praying the creature had gone. Tyler tried the engine again, and miraculously, it roared to life. Without a second thought, we sped down the road, the headlights cutting through the darkness as we left Dead Horse Point behind. By morning, we were back in Moab, dazed, exhausted, and shaken beyond belief. Tyler's arm was bleeding from where the creature had scratched him, and I had bruises from gripping him too tightly. We warned other campers, but no one believed us. Later, as I lay awake in the safety of a crowded campsite, I could still hear it, whispering my name on the wind, lingering in the corners of my mind. Maybe it was waiting, or maybe it was just saying goodbye. Until next time. When we first arrived at Shenandoah National Park, I remember thinking how peaceful it all was. The towering trees, the vast open skies, and the faint sound of birds singing in the distance. This was exactly the kind of break we all needed. I'm Alex, the planner of the group, and I'd organized this camping trip to get away from the stress of city life. Mark, my boyfriend, sat in the passenger seat beside me, relaxed and smiling as we made our way along the winding mountain road. Behind us in the RV were Jessica and Eric, my 2 closest friends. They weren't exactly the outdoorsy type, but they'd agreed to come along, maybe out of some sense of duty to reconnect. Eric was already cracking jokes about how bad he'd be at camping, while Jessica half laughed nervously, fiddling with her phone. I remember feeling so confident, so prepared. I'd planned everything, except, of course, for the things no one could plan for. We parked the RV at a small secluded site off the Appalachian Trail, far from the more populated areas. That was the whole point. Isolation, serenity, nature at its purest. The weather was supposed to be clear all weekend, perfect for hiking and camping. As we started setting up camp, the first signs of trouble were small. Jessica complained about her shoes. "These hiking boots are killing me. Why did I even buy them?" she groaned. "They're probably just stiff," I said, brushing her off. I was already focused on getting the tent up, but that's when I noticed Mark shaking his head. "The tent's missing poles," he said, laughing a little. "We'll have to use the RV for tonight." "Fine," I replied, hiding my frustration. "Minor setbacks, nothing more." The real trouble began as dusk fell. It was subtle at first. As we sat around the small campfire Mark had built, the woods around us seemed to grow quieter. The birdsong, once a pleasant background, faded into nothing. No wind stirred the leaves, and even the occasional sound of wildlife disappeared. I chalked it up to the natural rhythms of the forest, nocturnal creatures and all that. But then I noticed the smell. At first, it was faint, a whiff of something rotten, like spoiled meat. I thought maybe it was something in the air, or that something had died nearby. I didn't mention it, not wanting to freak anyone out. Eric, of course, was oblivious to the shift in mood. He was still joking around, telling some story about a horror movie he'd seen last week. "This place reminds me of one of those settings," he said, grinning as he poked at the fire. "A group of friends in the middle of nowhere, and then bam, haunted by some spirit or creature." "Shut up," Jessica muttered, hugging her knees. "This place is creepy enough already." I rolled my eyes at them both, but Mark shifted uneasily beside me, glancing out into the darkening woods. I was about to ask him what was wrong when he stood up suddenly. "Did you hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" I said, feeling a flicker of irritation. We'd barely been here a few hours and they were already on edge. "I swear I heard something," he said, his voice tense, like footsteps, heavy, coming from the woods. Eric laughed, but it was strained. "It's probably a bear or something, or maybe Bigfoot." Jessica looked pale, her eyes darting to the dark forest around us. "This isn't funny, guys." "It's nothing," I said firmly. "Just the woods settling down for the night. Let's not spook ourselves over nothing." But as the evening wore on, that smell of rot kept coming back, and so did the uneasy silence. Even the crackle of the fire felt muted. The next day was supposed to be better. We set out on the trail, hoping to shake off the weirdness of the night before. The weather was colder than expected, with a thick mist hanging low in the valley, making everything damp. Jessica slipped a few times on the muddy path, cursing under her breath. "This fog is so creepy," she muttered. Mark tried to lighten the mood. "It'll clear up once the sun's out. Let's just enjoy the hike." But I could tell he was uneasy too. None of us had slept well. Every time I drifted off, I thought I heard something moving outside the RV. Maybe it was my imagination, but something kept waking me up, like a low rustling or breathing. Halfway through the hike, we reached a lookout point. The fog had lifted just enough for us to see the rolling hills stretching out below us. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. Then I saw Mark standing at the edge of the trees, staring into the distance. "Mark?" I called. He didn't answer. I walked over to him, a knot forming in my stomach. "What's wrong?" He pointed, his face pale. "Do you see that?" I squinted, looking where he was pointing. At first I saw nothing but trees, but then something moved. A figure, tall and gaunt, barely visible through the mist. It stood completely still, as though it had been there the entire time, watching. "It's just a hiker," I said, though my voice sounded less confident than I'd hoped. "That's no hiker," Mark whispered. "Look at it." The figure stood too tall, its limbs too thin, and its skin seemed pale, almost translucent. But before I could get a better look, it was gone, melted into the fog. By the time we got back to the RV, the mood had soured. Mark was withdrawn, barely speaking, and Jessica kept glancing over her shoulder as though she expected something to jump out at us. The smell returned as we gathered around the campfire again that night. This time it was stronger, more pungent, like decaying meat left out in the sun. Eric wrinkled his nose. "Okay, seriously, what is that?" "It's the woods," I said, though even I didn't believe it anymore. The silence pressed down on us like a weight, and then from deep in the trees we heard it. A voice, soft, distant, but unmistakably human. "Help me!" We all froze. "What the hell?" Eric whispered, his eyes wide. The voice came again, a little closer. "Help! Help me!" "It's someone in trouble," Mark said, standing up. "We need to go check." "No," I said, grabbing his arm. "We don't. That doesn't sound right." The voice was too calm, too controlled. There was no panic in it, no urgency. It sounded wrong, like it was echoing in the wrong direction. Jessica was shaking now, her face pale. "We have to leave. I don't like this." For once, Eric wasn't joking. "Yeah, maybe we should call it quits." But Mark was already moving toward the trees. "Mark, stop," I hissed, following him. "This is crazy." He didn't stop. He kept walking toward the voice, his expression blank, as if he were in a trance. I reached out, grabbing him and pulling him back, just as a figure emerged from the fog, the same gaunt figure we'd seen earlier. It stood at the edge of the clearing, impossibly tall, its limbs too long, its eyes hollow black pits. My blood turned to ice. "What is that?" Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. The figure took a step forward, its body moving in a jerky, unnatural way, like it didn't know how to walk properly. Then, with a sickening crack, it twisted its head to the side, staring at us with those empty, soulless eyes. Mark stumbled back, snapping out of whatever trance had held him. We need to go now." The four of us rushed to the RV, slamming the door shut behind us. Outside, the figure circled the clearing, watching us, waiting. The next few hours were a blur of panic. We tried to start the RV, but the engine sputtered and died. The flashlight batteries drained within minutes. Every time we looked outside, the figure was there, standing at the edge of the trees, just watching. "We're trapped," Eric muttered, pacing the small space of the RV. "What the hell is that thing?" "It's not real," I said, though even I wasn't sure anymore. It can't be. But it was, and it wasn't going anywhere. Mark sat in the corner, his head in his hands. "It's the Wendigo," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "What?" I asked, staring at him. "The Wendigo," he repeated. "It's an old Native American legend, a spirit of insatiable hunger. It drives people mad, makes them turn on each other." "That's ridiculous," I said, but my voice shook. "I've heard of it," Eric said, his face pale. "It feeds on fear and hunger." A cold realization washed over me. The constant hunger we'd all been feeling, the strange cravings, the paranoia. Everything had started the moment we'd arrived. "It's trying to drive us mad," Mark said, his eyes wild. "That's why it hasn't attacked. It wants us to destroy each other." By the time night fell, the Wendigo was closer, standing just outside the RV, its gaunt, twisted face pressed against the window, its fingers tapping softly on the glass. Jessica couldn't take it anymore. "I have to get out of here," she screamed, bolting for the door. "Wait!" I shouted, but it was too late. She was already outside, running into the woods. We rushed after her, but the fog swallowed her whole. I could hear her screaming, her voice echoing through the trees, and then silence. We found her body a few minutes later. Her limbs were twisted, her face frozen in a mask of terror. The Wendigo stood over her, watching, its empty eyes locked on us. "We need to leave," Mark said, his voice shaking now. We stumbled back to the RV, but as we slammed the door shut, I saw the look in Mark's eyes. The hunger had taken hold of him. He was muttering to himself, his eyes darting toward me, then Eric. "He's not right," Eric whispered. "It's inside him." Mark lunged at me, his hands grasping at my throat. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I can't stop it." I struggled, pushing him off, and he collapsed to the floor, sobbing. Eric grabbed a metal pipe and stood over him, ready to strike if he tried again. "We have to get out of here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The Wendigo was still outside, waiting. As we approached, the fog began to lift. We packed what little we could carry and made a run for it, leaving the RV behind. The Wendigo didn't follow, it just watched, its hollow eyes locked onto us as we disappeared down the trail. Even now I can still feel its gaze, like it's always there, just beyond the edge of my vision, watching, waiting. I'll never go back to the wilderness again. Not after what I've seen. Not after what we've done.